One of the things that you're going to have to learn while you're standing for your marriage is how to cover your spouse. Just like in the Garden of Eden, when Adam and Eve sin, the Lord covered their nakedness. He killed and sacrificed the first animal to make clothes for them, to cover them from their guilt and their shame. And just as Noah's sons, after their dad was drunk, they placed a blanket over him to cover his nakedness. And it's not meant to pretend like there's not anything wrong happening, or that what your spouse is doing is not, you're not allowed to share what your spouse is doing. It's just to what degree, to what extent are you sharing, and having discernment about who you share it with and how much you share. I think there's a big difference between sharing to process, to pray, to just release that emotional burden, and having someone pray with you, than sharing because you're complaining, you're venting unnecessarily, you're wanting other people to sympathize for you, to be on your side, to be on your team. We want that validation. And it gets really difficult, especially when you start to overshare with family and close friends about everything that's going on. One, because restoration is not linear. That's the first thing. When you and your spouse begin to start to come back together, it may feel like 2 steps forward, 3 steps back, 5 steps forward, 12 steps back. Like it takes time. And unfortunately, God hasn't given everyone around you the same grace He's given you, and the same understanding He's given you to hold space for your spouse as they are walking through this. And how you steward this part of your restoration is going to make a huge difference for when your spouse does come back and he's being reintegrated back into your life, back into your family. It's going to make a big difference whether he has to face and overcome all these negative things that were said about him that weren't necessarily not true, right? They were real. But again, people, because they love you and because they care for you, they want to protect you, they're going to be hurt by the things that your spouse may have done to you or said to you or didn't do with you or to you. And so it's pain that they also have to process and heal from. And it's not to say that you can't share anything that's happening. It's just being very mindful what you're sharing. And you get to a point where your circle starts to become smaller and smaller. You are not sharing with a lot of people what is going on in your life in the process of restoration. You're keeping it, like Mary, close to your heart. And it could be a long season, in the sense, like it could be, a year. It could be months where you're not really talking about your stand or the restoration or the relationship or what's going on with your spouse, because you're just allowing God to work, and no one really needs to know the intricacies of that. And just to share, a personal example, a personal testimony, my husband and I, we were restored. We moved in together. We were living together. We shared with my family and his family what was happening, and then things took a turn, and I had to move out, and we were not living together for almost a little bit over a year. And in that time, I did not share with my family what was going on. I kept that part of our story to myself. My family, they would come over rarely, and it's not that I was keeping them away. I had our home set up to where it looked like he was living there, our new home, but he wasn't. And all they knew was like, hey, this is just a difficult season that we're walking through. And there's just a lot that, that is going on that you guys don't really need to be privy to right now. And it was through God's grace that every time I went to see my family, I would always pray. I was like, Lord, please, if I'm supposed to still be covering my husband, right? Because now we're talking months of not sharing with anyone in my immediate family what was going on behind the scenes. And, every time they would ask about me, I would share just vague stuff like, okay, yeah, like he's busy, he's working, he wanted to be here, but he couldn't be here. And just covering him. And it got to a point where I was like, Lord, I don't know if I'm supposed to still be doing this. Like, I don't want to continue. It felt like I was lying. I was like, I don't want to keep doing this. And I was like, you're going to have to give me the words. You're going to have to give me the grace. You're going to have to give me the strength to continue to do this if this is what you're calling me to do. And I remember in one family vacation I was the most nervous about. It was where I saw God move the most. And it was crazy because every time I had small moments with family members, and it was just, we were catching up, we were hiking, we were walking, and they're like, oh, and how's your husband doing? And I was like, good. And then, I'd share something very brief, because the Lord always gave me just enough to be able to share, to like update, but not anything detail wise about what was going on between us. And just like clockwork, someone would interject the conversation and the topic would change. And, and like that person probably felt like, oh, I asked and there was a response, and then like it didn't get brought up again. And it happened multiple times on this vacation. And I was just praising God because I was like, okay, Lord, I know that this is what I'm supposed to be doing because you're covering me as I'm covering him. And to fast forward, when the time came for him to see my entire family, it was like as if nothing had happened. It was so easy for him to just show up, and it was in a very unexpected way. Unfortunately, it was tragedy that brought us all together, and him and I were already back in communication, talking again, but my family, again, they did not know what had happened that entire year prior. They just got to see us in that moment as if like as a continuation of where they thought we were at. And so that was really good for him because one, it took a lot of strength and courage for him to show up, but then to be welcomed as if nothing had happened the year prior. Nothing made it awkward. It didn't make it strange, and it made it really easy for him to connect with my family, and also for him to want to be around them. And I think that was a big learning lesson for him, was that that he felt accepted, he felt wanted, people wanted him to be there, and then he slowly began to make the effort to show up more because he sensed that I'm welcomed here. Now, like I said, I wasn't hiding everything from my family. They just knew what they needed to know, kept it very vague, and protected my husband and in that season. And it wasn't easy. I mean, there was times that I was just be like, Lord, I just want to tell him everything. I just want to tell him everything. And but I think it was more of a coming from a place of what I recognize is that sometimes we tend to gossip about ourselves. And that was a pretty big wake-up call for me, because that is something, gossip is a sin, and it is a very easy sin to get wrapped up in, especially when people are talking about each other's lives and things like that. And I never really thought about it as like, I'm gossiping about my own life, about my own marriage, about my own family, because the people I was talking and sharing with weren't really necessarily individuals that had the best interest for me. They just wanted to know information so then they can talk about it and talk about it and discuss it in their own time, in their own space. And it's just like I just didn't want my relationship, my marriage, to be the center of or the topic of conversation. So it required a lot of self-control, a lot of discernment of what to share and who the people I shared with. And I remember sharing initially with my parents, and I asked them, I was like, look, I'm going to share this with you guys, and I have a hard time sharing with you guys things that are going on in my personal life, because every time I share with you, then XYZ people, I hear them talking about it because you've breached the trust that we have. And so and then I would test if they would be able to hold in what I was willing to share with them. And again, kept it very low key for an entire year, and getting to see the fruit of that. And like I said, it wasn't easy, but through God and Him giving us the strength and just trusting, like going into these situations and being very prayered up before I go, I'll be like, okay, Lord, give me discernment. If I'm supposed to share something, I'll share. If I'm not supposed to say anything, keep my mouth shut. Help me to talk about something else, And so I wanted to share that for any of you, especially as you are starting to see more communication, more things happening between you and your spouse. You see that things are progressing, are moving forward, and they're kind of one foot in, one foot out. I think that's the part where those are the things that are very difficult for people to experience, is when they're one foot in, one foot out. And especially if you are one foot in, one foot out, because sometimes the highs are highs and the lows are lows. And so it's really important that you're emotionally stable through this process, and your emotional stability is what's going to give other people the hope and the faith that they need to believe this with you. But if you're constantly talking about what they did wrong, how they fall back, how they relapse, how they pull back, how this, how that, it makes it really hard for anyone to, unless they understand the situation, unless they understand the behavior, the patterns that most prodigals, or I don't love the word prodigals, but most husbands or spouses who are in this clouded space tend to exhibit. It makes it hard for them to really grasp. So anyways, I hope that this is helpful for someone. If you find yourself in this season, I just want to encourage you to keep doing it. Keep covering your spouse. Keep covering their nakedness, because there will be fruit, and it is going to be when you least expect it, and when you can share with your spouse. I mean, I remember sharing that text with my husband and just saying, hey, I know we haven't even talked about this, but I just want you to know that my family knows this, and they know that when this happened, things just looked different between us because you needed to be somewhere else. And that's all I've shared with them, and allowing them to feel that safety to reintegrate back into life, because we just don't know how quick or how long those episodes will last. And so the closer and the tighter you can keep your circle in those moments, the better it will be for everyone. So I hope that this was helpful, and I hope you have a blessed day.